This is Tyler Buchheit coming to you again for Steiner Tractor Parts with another how-to repair video. Today we're working on a John Deere live PTO clutch. In this particular instance we're working on a John Deere model 630, but the clutch is very similar whether you're talking about the earliest model tractor, the Model R that had the live PTO clutch, and all the way up through the 50, 60, 70, 80 John Deere tractor, as well into the 20 and 30 series two-cylinder tractors. They used a wet disc, multi-disc wet clutch that was bathed in oil and had a continuous flow of oil through a gear pump to keep everything oil circulating and keep the clutch disc cool. So if you're thinking about doing this job and you're faint of heart, perhaps you should leave it to a professional, because it's not a simple task. But if you have basic skills and you're comfortable adjusting the valves on your tractor or possibly doing an overhaul, rebuilding a power shaft clutch on your John Deere two-cylinder shouldn't be any harder than that. So let's get to it. So with the John Deere system, and particularly focusing on the 630, although the others are very similar on the other models, power's drip comes to the power shaft, and it's live, meaning independent of the transmission. Whether the hand clutch is engaged or disengaged has nothing to do with the power shaft, which is quite handy when you're doing anything in the field such as baling hay or using a rotary mower. So that power comes off your crankshaft along your reduction cover, your clutch pulley into the transmission, and through a series of bevel gears, power is redirected and transferred back via shafts to the rock shaft housing on your tractor. Or it may not be the rock shaft housing, but at least the rear cover and the housing that would encase the power shaft clutch. Power comes back, and we have the rock shaft off for demonstration purposes, and I'll explain more into the video why we took the rock shaft off. Power comes to the input side of the shaft. There's this housing here encases an oil pump that constantly keeps oil flowing through, in and around your clutches to keep everything nice and cool and oil circulating. You don't want that clutch to get hot if it's slipping or being used. And then it goes to the input shaft. You have a clutch pack that sits inside of this housing, and then at the very last there's a set of gears in the outer end of the clutch pack, and then another gear in the shaft held on two bearings that comes out for your power shaft output shaft. That's a lot of shafts in the same sentence, but I think you know what I mean. You know, it's engaged and disengaged by linkage to this lever in this arm. It goes in and engages the clutch pack and provides spring tension or disengages. This little window right here, this plate held on with I think two studs and a bolt, is where you would go to make final adjustment or to adjust your power shaft clutch. And yes, this is something that would normally need to be adjusted. If your power shaft clutch is slipping, it may just need adjusted, and probably most of them, like all the tractors out there, could use a good oil change. A lot of the clutches hold about 4.5–5 quarts depending on your model, and as always when you're starting a project like this, highly recommend for sure having your operator's manual, but more like you're going to need a technical manual, whether that's a factory John Deere service manual or an INT service manual. Something about the live power shaft clutch on my old two-cylinder tractors that always seems to be a bother, and maybe it's just something that's more of an annoyance to me than anything, is when you're driving, you start up your tractor and the first thing you know, your power shaft starts spinning, freewheeling. Well, there's a couple things that can cause that. For one, if you don't want it spinning and you're not using and you don't want to do anything, you can actually disengage the power shaft manually. Most Waterloo built John Deere two-cylinders have a whether it's a lever or for instance on the 720 or 730, it looks like a piece of steel that came up out of the transmission case with a flat end that you could put an adjustable wrench on, and you can actually disengage them manually. This needs to be done with the tractor off, not running, and to re-engage the same way, because you're actually physically disengaging a set of straight cut gear. But as far as reasons why your clutch can be freewheeling, first thing is it could be just way far out of adjustment. Secondly, your linkage could be out of adjustment. Or lastly, if your linkage is adjusted properly per the service manual and it's still free travel or freewheeling, the power shaft spinning over, you very likely have a power shaft clutch brake that is disintegrated or completely missing. And thankfully that's something that Steiner does offer, all the parts to repair that. And in this case, we'll check this out and see what we have. In this particular project with this 630, the original power shaft and rock shaft housing was damaged. So this is a substitute. It came off of a parts tractor. So we don't know what we're going to find when we get inside, but one way or another we're going to go all the way through it. Alright, so now it's time to disassemble the power shaft clutch and have a look inside and see what we might find. Now bear in mind, we're doing this for this particular video, we're doing this rock shaft housing, disassembling it off of the tractor. You can do it on the tractor without disassembling the rock shaft, at least to remove the power shaft clutch and assess what you need to do as far as parts. If you do it on the tractor, it's important to note that if you have a 3-point hitch on your 20 or 30 series 2-cylinder tractor, you will have to remove it and the right side draft link support, also known as the elephant ear, as it interferes with clutch linkage and so on. You also have to disconnect the power shaft clutch foot linkage and remove it completely from this arm that engages and disengages the clutch. Now, to remove the power shaft clutch, you don't need to do anything special. It doesn't matter if it's engaged or disengaged. I recommend doing it disengaged personally. Remove all the bolts around the housing like this. And I think there's two studs in this case, and then several bolts. We're lucky enough on the 30 series that John Deere put tabs on each side to use a pry bar to help break the seal between the gasket and the cover. So we've done that, and it's broken loose, and also note we've got the oil drained. So we're going to go ahead and pull it out. Now this is you got to be prepared because it is a little bit heavy. We'll see if I can manage to smash any fingers. There's a lot of weight as it comes out. And it's really important to make sure that we don't lose any pieces as we do this. You notice one of the brass ears that engages and disengages your power shaft clutch on the cam actually fell down. We've got to find that. So looks like we have some nice cruddy nasty stuff inside of this power shaft clutch, as probably was indicated by the oil that came out of it. Just a little tip, something I like to do if I have the rock shaft on the tractor and it's still running, is do yourself a favor, drain the oil from your rock shaft and find out what you have. If it's really thick and it looks like you have gear lube, that could be one cause of your power shaft clutch possibly failing. 90 weight in the power shaft clutch can actually cause the linings to overheat and come apart. And the reason for 90 weight getting in there is one of two things. Either somebody put gear lube in the power shaft clutch not knowing any different, or the seals on your input shaft have failed, allowing gear lube to go in to your pump and ultimately into your power shaft clutch. But aside from just draining that oil, it's also a good idea, best practice, to replace the plug, put it back. And I recommend you could use kerosene or diesel fuel, something that will act as somewhat of a solvent. Personally, I like kerosene. Put it back in, engage your power shaft, and let the tractor and whatnot run for 10 minutes. And then drain it and before disassembling, and you'll have a much cleaner area to work with in your power shaft clutch. And unless you just really like grease. So we're going to go ahead and the next video segment tear apart the clutch. Alright, so the reason we have the rock shaft off the tractor, and I would highly recommend everybody do this unless you've just replaced the seal for some unknown reason, is remove the rock shaft from the tractor, because it's important. We want to replace this little oil seal right here that if it allows gear lube to seep past it and you rebuild your clutch without replacing that seal, all your work and effort could be in vain and your new clutch ruined. So I highly recommend removing the rock shaft from your tractor, or the rear end cover housing with your power shaft clutch in it. Perhaps if you have a standard 730, let's say. Okay, So to remove this, don't just simply drive the shaft out, because it will push another inch or so forward, making you think, oh, it should just drive right out. No, that's not the case. So you got to remove the bolts holding this on, and in this case there is a little groove in the top where we can pry against. We have to slide this cover off like so. Once that pops loose, and I know I make it look easy here, you see the gear comes out. This is the idler gear, and this is your housing, and all this does is circulate oil for your power shaft clutch. And it looks like in this case we did find some thick oily residue in the power shaft clutch. That seal, the lip, is blown out. So not a big surprise. It's a good thing we did replace this seal. Now that you have the oil pump off the back, we can actually remove the main shaft where your clutches sit inside. And from the back side, we can pull the whole assembly out, just like so, nice and greasy. And of course yours will be clean, because I'm sure you've used kerosene and run it for about 10 minutes and drained it, and nice and clean. So some things to look at immediately. You have a ball bearing right here. We can check it, see how it sounds. This one actually seems like it's pretty good. There is some evidence in this power shaft clutch that perhaps a mechanic has been into it in its lifetime. Some other things to look for: the surface on the shaft where the seal rides. There's also another surface. There's a bushing inside of our oil pump housing. You can't see it very well in this picture, but if you look down in your housing, there is a bushing that rides in there right behind the seal. And that's something you may need to address. And that's where your handy dandy service manual will come into effect to give you specifications, but just things to look for and to check it out. So we've got that done. Now if you're like us in this case, we're going to spend some time cleaning the cavity out. That's all nice, and we're not quite sure. It's about the consistency of warm caramel. The next step will be disassembling the actual power shaft clutch from the cover and show you the tricks on that. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and reassemble the main shaft and the power shaft clutch oil pump in its housing. And my brother Alex right now is putting shellac on the surface. Some would say this isn't a necessary step. I find it on machine surface. I like to use something like an Indian head type shellac. You can get some in aerosol cans or whatnot, but whatever you do, don't use silicone on machine surfaces, and don't use a die grinder or anything abrasive here either. If you do have to remove any old residue, try solvent. If that doesn't work, maybe some very double-aught steel wool. But Alex is now going to assemble the pump housing on the main shaft, and it's going to want to slide forward, so I'm going to hold it in here. And you have to install the gear at the same time, and then slide the pump housing over everything. And when he gets it in place there, he's probably going to need a dead blow hammer to do so, which of course is on the other side of the table. But get it in place. There are two dowel pins that locate it. And once you've done that, secure with the cap screws, and there should be some locking tabs, metal lock tabs, to hold it in place. Now we should not have any problems with oil getting in or out where it shouldn't be. Here we are. We've got the power shaft clutch assembly right here on the table in front of us. Good idea to make sure all the oil is kind of drained out of it. If you got a parts washer, you might wash it up if you're in a hurry. In this case, we're going to completely disassemble it, so it is just as it came out of the tractor. We're going to go ahead and disassemble the power shaft clutch pack just like this. It's going to require a pair of snap ring pliers, and I highly recommend good heavy-duty snap ring pliers. This happens to be Snap-on. There's other brands out there, but it's important that you get the kind of snap ring pliers with flat ends when you're dealing with snap rings of this caliber. Always want to make sure safety glasses, snap rings, safety first. So you just push down on this disc. There's a little spring pressure under it, but not a lot. So we're going to remove this snap ring. Sometimes snap rings in my shop are not always perfect. Alright, snap ring is removed. Take off my safety glasses so I can see here. Alright, the top plate comes off. Wow, there's still clutch facing remaining, although it's starting to get thin. You know it's an old original clutch facing if the facing has no cross hatches or cuts in it like the new ones, but I'll show you later. So just laying this out. Notice there's 3 little springs. These springs are more or less in there to, when your clutch is disengaged, to expand the clutch apart so that oil can get in and keep it lubricated while everything's spinning so nothing gets hot. Remove these discs. These really don't look all that bad. And you'll notice they're alternating disc with facings and then a smooth metal disc, so on and so forth. And to save time, you can grab all the discs. And we get down to the end plate. That's the whole clutch. Now we're on to the power shaft clutch cam assembly, and this is what actually would adjust your clutch. There's a small kind of a set screw that you actually screw it in to adjust the clutch. For right now we're not going to do anything with it, but it's very important to remember that's what we actually loosen and tighten to adjust the clutch. And I always take time to observe the wear. You can see this clutch has been adjusted several times, as there's wear marks where these little ball bearings ride in and out as it snaps over center. It'll wear grooves and it'll get in different positions every time you adjust it. So this one here appears like it's been adjusted at least 3 different times in its life, which is slightly less than normal. I've found them that there's deep grooves worn in there, but this part should be just fine, shouldn't warrant the need for replacement. You might find a magnet handy to pull these balls out. Otherwise, when you pick this up, the balls will go flying everywhere in your shop floor. Pull those out. Now we're ready to pull the cam right off. And as I suspected, there is no brake remaining on this power shaft clutch. Let's take a look. Okay, now we're down to the next part, which can get a bit tricky if you have a later style clutch. Some of the earlier ones, earlier models such as the 50, 60, and 70, and some of the early 20 series tractors, this plate is actually bolted on, where the later design used studs and these little retainer rings. Now if you follow your handy dandy service manual, it'll tell you just to stick a snap ring type plier or expanding type plier in there to spread those rings. These aren't snap rings, they're sort of like soft metal rings. I find the easiest way to take them loose is with 2 short screwdrivers. They can be a bear. Don't worry about misshaping them, you can reuse them later. Okay, next we'll remove the PTO brake. There's still some lining remaining. It's very common to find the lining for the brake to be completely gone. Okay. Alright, now that we've got the power shaft clutch pack off and the cam assembly off of the unit, it's time to remove the oil seal housing around the power shaft and the bearing cover, like so. I've already loosened these up, I'm not that strong. just to do that with my bare fingers. Get these all off. Alright. This cover just pops off. You might have to tap it with a hammer, depending. Alright. So here we're looking at the ball bearing at the end of the power shaft, clutch shaft, I guess you would say. And we're going to go ahead and take this oil seal off. It's very common to find an oil seal here that has been leaking, leaks all around the shaft. Definitely gets dirty in a hurry. Take care, make sure there are metal shims as well as paper shims. In this case, it hung on with the housing, or the seal housing for us. Take care not to lose those. We'll need those for reassembly. And if you happen to need more, which is certainly common, or if you happen to find that you don't have any on yours, Steiner does have new steel shims available, as well as the paper shims. So what we have to do now is there's a snap ring retainer that retains, that holds the bearing, and then there's a washer between the bearing and the snap ring on this shaft, and we'll actually have to use a hydraulic press to press this shaft out of the bearing. That's the safest way to do it. It can be done by other means, but definitely recommend a shop press to get that all out. And it's definitely something that's required if we need to replace things internal, such as we want to check the springs inside of this assembly, as well as if we need to replace this the disc that actually wears against your power shaft clutch brake. So we'll be heading back to the shop press, and we'll show you how to do it there. Okay, we've got the power shaft housing with the shafts, getting ready to press this shaft out of the ball bearing. Taking great care to make sure that everything's supported good underneath. It's very important also, it's hard to show this angle, but make sure that your press accommodates that there's a clearance there at allowing the whole shaft and the cam assembly or the spring assembly to clear everything underneath. We're going to go ahead and press this out. Take care, as this comes loose, both shafts can potentially come on down. So, but my press is small enough, it's going to catch. Okay, so now what we're going to do is press the bearings off of the power shaft assembly. There's actually two tapered roller bearings here, with a bearing cup in the housing, and also one in the rock shaft housing. In this case, your best bet, of course, is to use a hydraulic press, and you actually press the shaft down through the bearing and the gear. Notice right here I took some emery cloth and cleaned up the surface. It always helps everything slide through the bearing and the gear. Notice what I'm doing. I am pressing the gear and the bearing down part of the way, but I'm not going to press it all the way off the shaft. And the reason for this is I'm actually going to flip it over and press the gear back in its original spot. Then I can get a bearing splitter between the gear and the bearing and pull the bearing the rest of the way off. Because really there's no need to remove the gear from the shaft. It just makes things a little bit easier. And now it's time to disassemble the power shaft clutch cam. And basically the cam is just multiple springs inside of this housing. Got to compress the cam to remove the snap ring that retains everything on here, so we can disassemble it. You can use whatever metal you like. We found a set of piston pins that are a matched set of piston pins for, of course, a John Deere, and then a flat bar across and a press. It doesn't take a lot of pressure, but we have to compress it just slightly. It's just enough to get to the snap ring. Now with the snap ring loose, we can take it out of the press and disassemble this back on our workbench. Alright, so this is how we've set up our press and our bearing splitter to remove the bearing after we press the gear back down to create a gap between the gear and the bearing. You can press the gear all the way off. It's really up to you, but in this case we don't need to remove the bearing or the gear from the shaft completely. It makes it a little bit of a logistical issue because it is keyed to the shaft, and when you have to press something together that's keyed, it has to be exactly dead on, or you're not going to be able to put everything back together. So that's the reason for that. We'll go ahead and press this off. Perfect. Alright, here's the assembly we've got set up to press the bearing, the little bearing, off of the power shaft. And sometimes these little bearings are tighter than the big ones for whatever reason. I don't know if they were tighter fit or whatnot. Let's just say it's not outside of the realm of possibility to need to use some heat to persuade these little bearings. We'll see if we can make it in this case. It's pretty tight. There we go. Shaft will drop out in just a second. There we go. Alright, now that we've got both bearings removed from that, we can go ahead and get the new ones out and assemble the bearings on the shafts. We're back to the workbench. Now it's time to see what surprises might wait in store for us inside the clutch and the cam assembly. Alright, something very important that the book notes is notice the very thick top washer that comes off right by the cam. It's a hardened washer. We've got to make sure to reinstall it there because the shims underneath it are not hard, and over time, if they were installed reverse, the shims would actually disintegrate from the snap ring and just vibrations. So take care that don't lose these. We're going to flip this over, and as you can maybe see, there's bits of springs that have already fallen out of the cam assembly. So we're going to go ahead and slide that off, pull the shaft out. Beautiful. Remove this large washer, and wow, I've probably rebuilt 15 of these power shaft clutches, and this is by far the worst one I've seen in terms of the springs being disintegrated and broken. That's really incredible. I've never seen one quite this bad. Especially wouldn't have guessed that it was this bad based on other things we've seen so far. Wow. Interesting. This is why it's very important to actually disassemble this hub assembly. If you don't have access to a shop press, you might, even when you do this in your own shop, find somebody that does, and take care to check this out, because clearly we're going to have to install all new springs inside of this. And luckily, John Deere still offers all the new springs available as of September 2012, when we're making this video, at least. So we'll clean everything up and see. But yeah, that's ugly. All right, we're going to start by removing the brake disc from the cam hub. And about the best, cleanest way to do this, you actually have the cam itself, which is a nice instrument for using a press. You can start first to break it loose by using the smaller side, not the tapered end, the smaller side, just to get it started. But it'll only press down maybe 1/8 of an inch before it interferes. So then remove it, and we're going to go ahead and press it some more by flipping it over so that it doesn't interfere. So now we're going to reassemble the clutch cam assembly with new springs. Yeah, the new springs look a little bit better than what we removed. So something very important to note, and I believe it's this way on all the models, although you need to refer to your specific service manual for your tractor. But the way the 630 and 720 and 530 and all those are, is there's nine springs in the clutch cam assembly, and there are 3 little springs that go inside of the big springs, and you alternate every third one so that they're equidistant from each other. So we get those in place. we'll take the shaft, slide the washer down over the shaft. Make this look easy, right? And I'm going to lift this up while I slide the shaft down into the assembly. And there we are. Right now we don't have anything compressed. So next step is to go to the shop press and reinstall shim washer and hard washer, and then retain it all with the snap ring. Alright, so we're going to finish compressing the cam spring assembly in the hub in our shop press. It's set up as you see. Definitely want to make sure before you even get started that your shim washers and your thick washer slide down between whatever you're using to press against the cam. We're going to press very, very easy until it bottoms out, meaning all the springs are compressed all the way. And you'll notice a little resistance. If you're using an electric pump on a press, be extremely careful. I would highly advise using a hand pump press. Alright, this clutch in particular, this cam, had 2 shim washers underneath the hardened washer, so that's where we're going to start from. Deere actually wants us to take a reading, so I'm going to go ahead and slide this down with the 2 shims and the hardened washer on top next to the snap ring. Very important. We do it in that order. Okay. Now, according to John Deere, we are going to let the cam assembly return 5/32 of an inch. We're going to let the springs expand that far. So we notice on our measurement, you see right where we are. Okay. One, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5/32. And it actually looks like we're probably not going to be able to get another shim washer in. The book actually says we want to be able to just get the snap ring into the snap ring groove. So it looks like that's just about right. So I think that's what we're going to go with. I don't think we need any more shim washers in this case. We'll reinstall the snap ring all the way down. Snap into place and release your press, and we have compression on the springs. Alright, now it's time to press our shafts into the bearing and into the overall power shaft housing cover. So I'm just going to install the ball bearing first, and it's important, most of these ball bearings, depending on if they're originals, they were shielded on one side, and the shielded side goes away from the tractor and the open side goes in toward the inside. So we're going to tap that in until it bottoms out. Okay, bottomed out. We're going to take the tapered bearing race facing in toward the power shaft. We're going to drive that in just a little ways. It's not quite flush. Now we're going to flip it over. You notice the open side of the bearing there. And we're going to have to support the bearing under the press, the ball bearing, and then we're going to slide, before we put that shaft in, we're going to slide the actual power shaft in, setting it down. It's got to go in first, very important, otherwise you'll be repeating some steps we talked about earlier on disassembly. And then we are going to press this end of the shaft into that ball bearing, just like so. Take care to line up the gears. Okay, get everything just into place. And it shouldn't take a lot of force here, folks. Just enough to gently persuade, making sure that the gear teeth align. Okay, but also note we're going to have to stop in this case, re-support the press, and so that the shaft will clear past the bearing. We're going to finish that up, and next we'll be installing the power shaft clutch. Alright, now we've installed the snap ring on the end of the shaft that we just pressed into the ball bearing in the housing, and I've cleaned and covered both surfaces with shellac, which is my favorite gasket sealant. We're going to be installing a JDS 2029 2029. That's the Steiner number for this little gasket. It's important to note the holes are not equidistant from one another, so there's only one way which it can go on. So we'll go ahead and line it up. Make sure the shellac kind of holds it in place. Then we're going to see if we get lucky with the bearing cap. Get all that lined up just right. That's why we bring these videos to you from Steiner. We like to eliminate a few headaches for you. You know, just like that little trick, you'd look at it 4 times and think, oh geez, am I cross-eyed? Did they not make the gasket right? And then you figure out that the holes are not equidistant. So we'll tighten those cap screws, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, now we've got the whole clutch cover and the shaft assembly perched up on some nice 8x8 blocks. Definitely makes it easier to work on, but use whatever suits you. Set it up. We're going to be installing the power shaft clutch brake, which is very important if you want your power shaft to stop. And we're going to go ahead and set that on here. And it only goes on one way. In this case, the clutch facing is on, or the brake facing is only on one side of the brake. So we're going to go ahead and set it down. And there's other models that actually have brake facing on both sides of the metal. It's also important to note that some of the earlier model tractors in the earlier 20 series and the 2-digit number series 50, 60, 70, 80, and the R used a brake plate that was actually adjustable by shims. It was like a one-piece shim that was open on one side and would go under here. And the procedure for adjusting that is definitely different, and that's where you're going to need to consult your specific service manual for your tractor. But in this case, we've got the improved design, and grabbing a dead blow hammer. I could grab a big steel hammer, but I'm going to notice these little clips that retain the brake plate on had been distorted from removing them. They're just soft steel, and the easy way to straighten them is on a flat surface. Just take a dead blow, and they're good and straight. We'll grab these, and to reassemble, simply a nice pair of pliers. And using a plier as the motivating force here. We get the clip into the grooves and compress with pliers. Perfect. We'll repeat the step 3 times. Try to be fast for you, folks. And the third one. Oh, it seems like the third one goes on tough, for whatever reason. Okay, now we've got that in place. Pliers back in the holster. We're going to go ahead and put the collar, as you see it right here. Now, if you're working on a 720 or a 730, the collar's actually got a tab that sticks out of it and a keyway cut into this hub. So you have to line that up. We'll go ahead and set that on there with this design. I'm going to go ahead and set the 3 balls in their respective slots. And we're going to go ahead and set the cam adjusting disc down on the assembly like so. And according to the book, we're going to start out, I'm going to adjust this to where this center cam is protruding a 1/16 of an inch from this lip. And that'll give us a good starting point to make an adjustment. So after this, then we'll go on to the clutch assembly in just a bit. Okay, I'm going to illustrate a little bit on overall how the clutch mechanism engages and disengages and works. So, and this is in the disengage position. Imagine the clutch pack up here. And what we actually do, there's 2 brass forks sliding on a collar. You engage with your foot or your hand lever. The collar slides up, snaps into place. It kind of snaps over center, just like the hand clutch on your tractor in a way. As long as there's pressure there, your power shaft clutch stays engaged. To disengage, you pull your lever back or push it back with your foot, and then it slides down and disengages, releasing pressure on the whole assembly. To make adjustments, and in this case, Deere stipulates that the centerpiece should be about a 1/16 of an inch up from this edge. So we screw this little set screw in all the way until it it doesn't interfere with these threads anymore. And using our straight edge ruler, a little rocket science here. Right now it is protruding about a 1/4 inch. So we need to be at a 1/16. So we need to screw this in a few rounds. See where we're at. Maybe just a couple more. All right, there we are, 1/16 of an inch. And then we simply screw this set screw out into one of the slots wherever it lines up. And next we're ready to assemble the clutch. All right, now it's time to assemble the clutch. We start with the end plate. And it's always handy, folks, while we're working on this kind of stuff, to not only have your service manual, but a parts diagram. You can actually go to the Deere.com website, and if you're not technically savvy, you might seek a little help, but you can print off the parts catalog there. And that means you can print it off as many times as you need to, depending on how much grease you get on the pages. So what we're gonna do is start with one of the thick end plates and slide that on down. And we're going to put one of the clutch drive discs, like so, in place. Okay, so next we're going to install our first driven disc. It's important before we install these driven discs to locate, looking for my screwdriver here, there are 3 oil holes inside in the lands, or inside the splines of the shaft. And it's important to note, if you look at the center of this, that these 2 slots are a little bit closer. Hey folks, it's Tyler for Steiner Tractor here. This is a little update. Apparently there was a video segment omitted from the original, so we're kind of fitting this in between the segments. Basically what I'm going to go over here is the assembly of the PTO clutch. After we've got the engagement ring, the collar, and the 3 balls on, I think has been covered previously, go ahead and slide the adjusting collar down. And take note right here, as I was starting to explain the previous segment, there are oil holes in the lands around, as I've got those marked in gold there. Oil actually flows from the PTO oil pump through here to keep the disc cool when it's disengaged, so it doesn't build up heat, and even while it's engaged, again, to dissipate the heat. It's important to note, if you can see that these are not spaced equidistant from each other. There is an uneven number of lands. There is 4 lands between one set and 3 between the others. So when we start installing our clutch discs, we've got to make sure that everything lines up just perfect, because we don't want to block those oil holes. And if you can see that, basically the oil holes correspond to the holes in the center of the power shaft clutch discs. So to assemble, I'm going to use the JDS 1076 end plate. We'll start with that, put it on. That doesn't matter, the orientation on it. And we start assembling the disc, alternating them, and just making sure we get everything assembled the correct way. And just alternating. I've already had these lined up previously, so that's why it's going so much faster than it may take you. Okay, now that we've got those in place, we've got the proper number of discs, I'm just going to kind of take my fingers and try to line up the little drive disc with the tabs on them to save time later. It's important we reinstall the 3 springs back in these little slots, and essentially what these do is when you disengage the clutch, it forces the clutch plates apart so that we are not looking at any friction going on there. Okay, so we've got the final drive plate, end plate. We slide that right down on. And the next part, you might want a friend, but I've done it and practiced it a couple times, so it's not a problem. You push it down, and it's not too hard. The springs really don't put that much pressure on it. And get the snap ring retainer on. And as you'll see in the next segment, lining up with our clutch drum. And there you have it. And we've already engaged it because it is a 2-man job, and I've only got a 2-man crew, and one of them is holding the video camera right now. So showing you this wouldn't be easy, but if you can imagine engaging it where it snaps over center with two big large pry bars. Once we get that done, we can remove the drum, and essentially our power shaft and the housing is ready to assemble into the tractor. There'll be a few other things we'll point out on the tractor housing before we install the power shaft inside of it. And after we clean our gasket surfaces, we're all ready to go. One thing I'll point out very quickly before we move on to the housing, there's a thrust washer that goes right here inside of the drum that is a must. And if your old thrust washer is in poor condition, replace it. It's money well spent. Otherwise you may have some problems. This original was actually good enough to reuse because it showed very little wear, so we're going to do that. Be a good idea to smear a little grease on it so it all sticks together and you're in good shape. Next we'll be installing oil seals and installing the clutch into the housing. Alright, so here we are we've already installed the shaft into the arm for the clutch operating arm. And in an ideal world, before we remove the shaft and this arm, we would have center punched somewhere on the shaft and perhaps somewhere on the arm as well to correspond which way we go. If you happen to forget that, an easy way to remember how to get it lined up without any guesswork is to notice that your key is in the vertical position, straight up and down, and put the arm in the position where the hole for the guides just clears the surface of the housing. And get it in there and you'll be just a-okay. Oh, by the way, we installed a new oil seal right around the corner here. Definitely highly recommend installing a new oil seal or you will be looking at oil leak on your tractor. So next we'll go ahead and install a washer and a little retainer ring in this groove on the shaft so that it stays put. And then we're also going to install a new bearing race right in here in this housing. A quick, easy way to remove a bearing cup in a blind hole is to take an arc welder and put just 2 spots of bead, maybe a ½ inch long on each side. Let it cool, and you should be able to. It will expand and contract, and the old bearing race will come right out with very little effort. All right. Something we want to talk about that is definitely somewhat important is talking about the linkage that goes from the foot pedal control on the tractor back down between the brake housing and transmission housing all the way back down to the arm, which ultimately attaches and controls onto the power shaft. It's definitely important to note when assembling that the rod here is turned this way and facing the end of the rod faces in toward the hydraulic line, and it gets a cutter key through the hole in there ultimately. If you do it the other way, it will rub on the transmission housing and actually interfere. Could be made to work, but certainly there could be issues with interference there. So also while we're in this area, we'll note depending on your when we make final adjustments, there is a quadrant here and a pin that actually turn on my light there. There's a pin that rides from the pedal down, and there's actually a spring inside of here. That's basically, there's a notch in the quadrant, so when we shut it all the way off, it pops out and it locks the brake, and that's ultimately what, if everything is adjusted right, ultimately what locks the power shaft in the brake position and keeps it from spinning. On this particular model, this lever right here is actually what manually engages and disengages the power shaft. On a 720, for instance, there's a shaft that comes up in the same area. It's important to take great care when we're removing the oil seals from the power shaft housing. You definitely want to put them in a vise and make sure your vise is tight. Sometimes it does require a little finagling with either seal removal prying type tools, or driving it from the other side with a blunt chisel or a punch of some sort. It's important to note when we install the seals, the original seal was a double lip seal made into one assembly. We're going to replace it with 2 single lip seals, and we're going to put them back to back with the lips of the seals facing away from one another because we want to seal out dirt and seal in the oil. Alright, so it's time to put the power shaft into the housing. Definitely while we're here we need to double check. We have this beautiful thrust washer right here on the shaft, and if I didn't point it out earlier, there is a bushing, a pilot bushing in there that we definitely want to check. That should have been earlier on in the process. If it's worn, scored, or grooves cut into it, it would need to be replaced. But the only way to remove that's to cut it out or use a sharp chisel and use your imagination. But we're going to go ahead and install this. It is heavy, so it's not a bad idea to get a friend to help. So I think we're going to have to take that arm off. Maybe not.
No, you ain't got it.
Okay. Okay, we finally got the power shaft clutch and housing assembly installed, and it was one of those things we realized we didn't have enough hands to do this together as well as videotape, so I apologize for that. But the gist of it is one person needs to probably support and get the clutch engaging collars and those little bronze tabs into the collar while operating this arm here at the same time as somebody else sitting on the ground is probably the best, lifting the whole housing. And it does take a bit of fortitude and some finagling. This one for some reason seemed to be a little bit more difficult for whatever reason. Hopefully your power shaft clutch experience is a little bit easier, but anyway, we got that in place. We're going to go ahead and tighten all of the cap screws and the nuts on the studs and go about. Alright, so here we are with a dial indicator. We actually were able to mount it off one of the ears for the power shaft shield, and running back, coming around. So what we have to do here is actually, with the shims, the paper shims and steel shims, establish between a 1 and 4/1000 of an inch end play on the power shaft itself to ensure that the bearings are going to last, and that there's not too much play to where the seal would potentially. Alright, we're going to try the shim pack again for the third time. Third time's the charm. We're finding that as we remove one paper shim, it reduces the end play in the power shaft by approximately 3/1000 of an inch. So this last time we were at about 4, just slightly more than 4/1000. So we're thinking removing one more shim will get us right at the 1/1000 clearance, which is the tighter end of the tolerance per the John Deere spec. Alright, so we've assembled the power shaft clutch, the housing in the tractor. We've set the end play on the power shaft bearings. And what I've done, after replacing the drain plug, took out this plug and I filled the power shaft with, this is just a 303 tractor hydraulic transhydraulic oil. John Deere's book's going to say to use a 10 weight oil. The reason I use the newer style, John Deere's High Guard oil, or anybody makes the transhydraulic oil, but the reason I say to use it is this is a wet multi-disc clutch. Modern hydraulic transhydraulic oils are formulated for wet multi-disc clutches. So it's going to beat just having a straight old 10 weight motor oil in there that really does not have additives to prolong and make those parts last longer. And clearly, if you're investing all this money in your clutch, you want to make sure it lasts as long as we can. So what we did is we actually fill the oil until the oil runs out the oil level fill plug. It's just a little 3/8 bolt with an aluminum washer on it that says oil level next to it. And once it runs out, then you can replace that. be sure to tighten it. If you don't, it will surely leak a little oil and make it nice and messy all over your tractor. So now that we've got it full of oil, we're going to next do is check the adjustment of the clutch. And on this particular model, which are going to be it's going to be the same on your late 20 series and your 30 series, and then there was also some 20 series that have been updated, is we're going to look for this little adjustment rod indicator. You want to zoom in for this. If you can see on the end of this indicator, there's grooves and lands, and each one of those represents approximately 45 thousandths. A combination of a groove and a land is approximately 90 thousandths, and 90 thousandths is sort of the magic number that we're looking for between the clutch being engaged and disengaged, meaning that the clutch discs are adjusted properly. So in just a second, we'll go into how to do that. If you have an older model, there are specific adjustment procedures, whether that's a 50, 60, 70, 80 Model R, that's specific to them, and I would refer you back to your service manual. Definitely want to make sure we adjust them properly. Okay, here we are adjusting the linkage for the power shaft clutch foot pedal. Now on late 20 series and 30 series tractors, the power shaft clutch has a two-piece pedal that is actually spring-loaded, and basically the difference between it and the early 20 series, the early 20 series had a one-piece pedal. Both the engagement and the disengagement, what you put your foot on, were made in one casting, and it did not have a brake lock. So you really relied, and your brake adjustment was perhaps a little more crucial. This design allowed for a positive brake lock, so that it positively engaged the lock on the brakes, so everything should be good. Now, since we've adjusted our power shaft clutch by the book and put it in, we're going to say, you know, it was supposed to be in the ballpark. So the next step is we need to adjust the quadrant that this little peg on the pedal travels through. Now, to adjust this, we've got to have the nut on the back side just a little loose, just enough so it releases pressure between the nut and your first reduction housing ear. And we need to make sure this jam nut is loose, and the slotted screw, if you will, in it is also loose. And this may take a torch. We actually had to heat it with a torch, and I replaced it with a new nut and cleaned up the threads so we would be able to adjust it. But with it engaged, the idea is the end result we want is when this pedal is pushed forward to engage, that this quadrant limits the travel of the pedal. The reason that's important is on 20 and some 30 series tractors, the light bar actually comes out right here from this little cork, and the light will be sitting right here in this area. And this pedal could interfere and actually hit that light bar. We don't want that to happen. If that does happen, the idea is we would actually screw this, loosen the jam nut in, screw that jam screw in tighter, so that it limits the forward travel of the pedal, because it'll actually, when the clutch engages, it actually goes over center just a little bit, and you can keep on going. So that's what that does, it limits it. Now when we disengage, we push on this pedal, the inertia from disengaging it when you stomp it down should lock this little peg right here, and there's sort of a recessed area in this slot. That's what actually positively engages the power shaft clutch brake. And when this is engaged, we know that the linkage is approximately set in the ballpark. There is an adjustment down on the end of this rod, and you may not be able to see it real well with this light. There's a yoke and a pin and a jam nut. Normally this is just used for adjusting the brake. However, if you've disassembled it and you don't really know, well, how far was the yoke on the engagement rod to start with, you don't know that, you've got to start from somewhere. If for some reason, and I think we just got lucky actually, because we did take this apart, heated it with a torch and cleaned up the threads and chased it with a tap and a die to make sure it's easy to adjust. But it is important to note that if your pedals aren't in the right spot, it's probably because this yoke is adjusted improperly. And you just have to play with it. If you can't actually push the pedal forward enough, even with this adjustment up here, we'll have to actually lengthen this rod so that it gives it enough length to engage the power shaft clutch over center. Or it may be the other way around and your clutch does, or your brake actually doesn't engage, and then we would need to shorten this rod. It's really a process of trial and error. And this definitely comes into play if where I can't stress enough having your service bulletin to show how to properly set it up. And of course, if you've got a 50, 60, 70, 80, or an R, the adjustment procedure for the clutch and the brake is certainly unique to those models, and you've got to have a service guide. So next what we're going to do is engage and disengage the foot pedal, and using on our indicator rod on the late 20 and the early and all the 30 series, check and see is our power shaft clutch properly engaged. And from what I'm feeling for the time being, there's enough force required to put it over center. It's probably adjusted pretty close. We're actually going to do it the scientific way and by the book and check it out. Okay, so we're down here on the side of the power shaft housing, and on this particular model there's actually a little window on the 20 and 30 series tractors. We take a plate off and there's a gasket behind that. Steiner does offer the new gasket, which actually OEM does not, so kudos to Steiner for offering this gasket. So what are we looking for in here? Well, if you remember from earlier when we assembled the power shaft clutch, there's a little screw right here that locks and unlocks depending on if we need to make adjustments to the power shaft clutch. So if you can't see this screw through the window, there's 4 slots on this cam right here, and you've got to find the screw. It's coming out of one of 4 slots, so you have a 1 in 4 chance of finding it the first go around. If you need to spin everything, you can certainly do that. With the transmission disengaged, you can make adjustments. So what we're going to do moving forward now is checking the adjustments, and I'll move the light here, checking the adjustments right here on the lands and the grooves. Now right now we have the clutch actually disengaged with the brake assembled, and we can see 1 land and 1 groove, and just a shade more, maybe another 0.010 on the next land. Now we're going to go ahead and engage the clutch in the next segment here, and then disengage it and observe how much this moves in and out. And the idea is we want 1 land and 1 groove. Okay, so now we're going to, looking at that clutch indicator rod with a helper on the tractor and somebody looking at the indicator rod, we're going to go ahead and engage the clutch. Okay. Now grab the clutch pedal, or have whoever's on the tractor take the clutch pedal and move it toward the disengaged position. And that person's going to note at that point, by pushing into the indicator rod, seeing how many lands and how many grooves are sticking out. In this case, we have 2 lands and 2 grooves. Now we're going to disengage the clutch and engage the brake position, so like the little lock we talked about on the quadrant up top, and then push the indicator rod in. If everything's adjusted properly, we should see 2 lands and 2 grooves, which actually we lucked out and we do see that. If you don't see 2 lands and 2 grooves, then we'll go into the procedure for adjusting the clutch. And let's cut. Okay, we're going to go ahead and cover the adjustment procedure actually by illustrating it a little bit from the book, just because on the actual tractor it's a bit difficult to get the camera into position. Here's maybe possibly a better view of the indicator rod, noting the lands and the grooves. The land and the groove together is 90 thousandths, and where it's located on the power shaft housing. If adjustment is necessary through the side window, in this picture it illustrates the draft elephant ear, more commonly called. If a 3-point hitch is in place, the right hand elephant ear would have to be removed so to gain access to the side access panel or plate on the clutch housing. And when we get in there, I think we went over the procedure to find the locking screw. We actually, once we find the locking screw, if we need to make adjustment, or this also would pertain to if your tractor didn't need an overhaul in the clutch, but it started slipping and we wanted to adjust. So there we have it. We now have a power shaft clutch that's completely overhauled with new bearings, gaskets, oil seals, linings, facings, and a brake plate. Just perfect and ready to give you many, many hours of service. Something important to note is, in my experience after rebuilding these clutches, it's a good idea before you paint your tractor or whatnot, if you're concerned about that, is go ahead and use the power shaft clutch, whether that's on a dynamometer or you're taking it out and baling some hay, or you name it, putting it on a hammer mill perhaps. But I certainly recommend to use it, and like most new clutches of any type, you can expect that you're probably going to have to readjust that clutch after a few hours of use as everything sort of seats in. So keep your service books handy and be prepared to go back and readjust, and in fact plan for that. So there you have it. That's rebuilding a power shaft clutch on the John Deere 630. Good luck, and you'll find how enjoyable it is to have a power shaft that's actually adjusted and that operates properly. Take care. Alright, so here we are looking at the power shaft clutch unit on a John Deere 60, and we went to drain the oil and found a little bit of a surprise. You might think that's cappuccino. Well, one thing's for sure, it sure doesn't taste like cappuccino. That is a sign of something wrong in there. Probably a combination of water and oil, although it does flow about like molasses. Could be 90 weight. So if you find something like this coming out of your power shaft clutch, it's a good bet we're going to have to at least change the oil and flush, and probably replace that seal on the input shaft that is allowing gear lube into the power shaft clutch. We'll get this drained out and cleaned up and check the adjustment. Gotta love it. Alright, we filled the power shaft clutch housing with kerosene, and we're going to try to dump out some of the remainder of the cappuccino type mixture that we found inside. We also noticed some pretty excessive end play on the shaft. Definitely some bad bearings and a bad seal and some other things, and looks like this unit's probably going to have to come apart at some point, but for now we're going to try to adjust that it does engage and disengage and the shaft actually stops, so the brake must be doing something. We're going to go inside for adjustment in just a little bit. Alright, so now we've got all the kerosene drained out. We've got both our fill plug and the inspection hole plug out, and we've engaged our power shaft. Now, for the sake of I can't get the video camera inside the clutch opening there, it's less than an inch. You can kind of see that what we're looking at there is a shim pack, and it's a little bit difficult to see exactly what the service manual tells us about adjusting the using a 3/32 rod, depending on your clutch. Some of the early ones use a 60 thousandths diameter, and the later ones used about a 90 thousandths diameter. And basically what we're doing by measuring this is looking to see, do we have the right amount of pressure compressing the clutch pack and compressing the springs, if you will. Because if we don't put enough pressure or force on those springs, our clutch is going to slip before it was really designed to. So that's really more or less what we're doing. This is definitely something you want to have your factory service manual for, and also be cognizant of the fact that sometimes these power shaft clutches have been upgraded from the originals. There were several update kits available, and it's very common to see that. Let's go ahead and disengage the clutch. Something on the two-digit numbered series, if we see that little screw, the slotted screw head right in there, this is actually an updated power shaft clutch on a 60. The originals, instead of that slotted screw mechanism, they actually had a washer in there with tangs that you would get it adjusted right and bend the tang of the washer over, and they were adjusted, somewhat differently. And they were I think they used 60 thousandths clearance instead of 90 in terms of measuring the pressure on the clutch pack. So this is definitely something we've got to get right. And on the early design clutches like this is something we should pretty well have set up on the bench when we've got it out of the tractor. But for now we're adjusting this with it in the tractor. Alright, we're actually going to look inside the clutch at what needs to be measured. And the multi pieces of thin metal that you see right in the middle of the hole, that's actually the shim pack used to set really the brake, if you will, to shim the brake plate away. And this is something that was done on the bench. I actually had to bend the shim pack out of the way with a screwdriver to be able to see what we're going to see. But look closely to the right of the shim pack. We actually see the clutch cam disc, and we're going to go ahead and engage the clutch. And you notice that plate, that sort of dark plate, which is the clutch cam itself, sort of moved away from the brake plate. And what we're doing is we're going to try to stick the wire in between there when the clutch is engaged versus disengaged. On this model it should be 90 thousandths of an inch. And then on the earlier models, as previously stated, with the clutch adjusting cam that's got the tang washer instead of the locking screw, it uses its 60 thousandths of an inch. So we're going to adjust that. We've actually did this, and it's we don't have enough clearance there, meaning the clutch is not tight enough. So we're going to have to tighten up the clutch. Alright, we made our final adjustment by spinning that cam right there, and we screwed the stop screw all the way in, and we spun the cam counterclockwise as you were standing at the back of the tractor by taking a screwdriver and prying it up, and then going notch by notch and checking the adjustment each time. Each time you'd get the cam in one of those slots, and we actually had to move it about, I guess, what, 5 or 6 slots. So that's pretty excessive to get the proper play, and you can kind of sort of see right in that hole past the shims. It's really hard to show it on the video camera, but we were finally able to get the wire in there, and the clutch lever actually took a lot more force to engage and disengage the clutch. But one thing to note in this instance, with the clutch cam so far out in the slot with that stop screw, that really indicates to us that there is a lot of wear on the clutch plates inside. There's really very little, if any, room for additional adjustment here. On a new clutch, for instance, that stop screw would almost be all the way in the bottom of the slot because the clutch plates are plenty thick. So really, in assessing a 60 or any other tractor with similar characteristics in this case, we're probably going to need to disassemble this clutch and have a look. There's some other things that I don't like to see, such as blue silicone around the housings. Other things like that, a lot of play. Really, the power shaft is loose. I'm sure it would leak oil during use. So that kind of gives you at least an overview of assessing what's going on in your clutch. And we're going to probably tear this one down at some point. And thankfully, Steiner has pretty well all the parts you need. And what they don't supply, John Deere still does. So happy hunting. Something important to note when actually checking the clutch adjustment, the book is going to say to use, in this case for this particular clutch, we were checking for 90 thousandths of an inch, and it suggests to use a 3/32 welding rod, which is apparently pretty close to 90 thousandths. We were actually able to find a piece of scrap copper wire, and as you can see, it's been bent and adjusted a few different times. You're going to have to make sure you start off with a piece at least 12 inches long, because you'll probably be cutting some off and bending it, and so you can get it into place and get it in there to check for adjustment. But really, essentially, we want at least 90 thousandths clearance or 60 thousandths, depending on which clutch you have, the early or the late style. And you can have more than that, but keep in mind, the more clearance you have, actually the tighter your clutch is. And it's good to have a tight clutch, but to a point, we still want the clutch discs to slip as they were designed to do. For instance, if you had an implement such as a rotary cutter, and let's say your rotary cutter has been sitting outside in the back 40 for the last 25 years, and all you did was hook it up and put gear lube in the box, and you went, and you say you found a stump, for instance. Well, If the slip clutch on the implement doesn't slip when you hit a slug, for instance, the power shaft clutch should slip. If it doesn't slip because you've adjusted it too tight, you might be taking your transmission and your whole power shaft driveline apart and looking for broken gears. Just say this from a little bit of experience of someone I know. But one other quick thing about these early style number clutches. They have a stop screw, and essentially all it is, it limits the travel of the clutch fork inside, and I can't show you, but essentially this clutch fork arm, as you pull this up as we engage the clutch, there's actually a stop screw inside of here that what we do to adjust it after we've made our final adjustment on the power shaft clutch inside, remove this top cap,